Not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Mental Health News Radio, produced by MHNRnetwork.com, your source for information about our favorite subject, mental health. This show is brought to you by our incredible sponsors like ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment organizations, and MyGenetics, that's MyGenetx.com, changing the way people are diagnosed and treated around the world, helping you better understand what makes you well. Don't you want information about yourself that empowers your mental health treatment? Also, who is minding the store, the finances of your behavioral health organization? TriadicLLC.com, that's TriadicLLC.com, is a full-service revenue cycle management and billing company focused on all the ins and outs of mental health billing. Our sponsors help keep this show on the air and advocating for everyone affected by mental health. Guess who that is? Everyone in the world. Take a listen to our show all the way to the end. You don't want to miss Miles the Therapy Dog's special goodbye. Hey everyone, this is Kristen Sananta-Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I'm here with Jonice Webb. We're going to talk about childhood emotional neglect. Jonice, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, tell our listeners, a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm a licensed psychologist in Boston, Massachusetts, and I am also a blogger and an author. I have 2 books. My topic is childhood emotional neglect, and both of my books are about that topic. And I've been writing and speaking about childhood emotional neglect for the past 5 years since my first book came out. I'm very passionate about this topic.
We are too, actually. And I think how we found you was we came across one of your great articles and then reached out to you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is a big topic, especially for our listeners. So why is this particular topic? Because there's a lot of behavioral health providers that listen to the show, and they are always curious, why is this your passion? So why is being in the mental health field your passion, and why this particular subject matter?
That's a great question. I always say I was born a psychologist. I cannot imagine having anything else as a career. And it just is literally how I think and how my mind works. I'm fascinated by human behavior, and I have been since I was a child. So becoming a psychologist is genetic, I think, somehow. But then my passion within a passion is the topic of childhood emotional neglect. And I feel so strongly about it because I started to see it in my practice so often myself, probably starting about 8 years ago. And I started to, as I began to notice it, I began to realize how powerful childhood emotional neglect is, how many people it affects. And I did a massive review of the American Psychological Association databases and realized that emotional neglect was almost never mentioned. And if it was actually talked about as physical neglect. And that's when I realized I needed to write my first book. And it's called Running on Empty, Overcome Your Childhood Emotional Neglect. And from then on, it's just been a road of people saying, thank you for talking about this.
Right.
And I do see it talked about more, and, other bloggers and other authors are picking it up, and that makes me very happy.
Yeah, that's so great when you introduce something that isn't there that's so pivotal, and it's so true. I definitely dealt with that as a child, and the running on empty. Oh my gosh. I just figured out that for me, a coping mechanism, and many of my friends are this way as well, a coping mechanism is we will get to that point where we're running on empty. Life is out of control, eating, maybe drinking, spending, all this stuff because we are emotionally caretaking of other people that are just a vortex of need, suffering from their own childhood emotional neglect. And we are getting to that place where, again, we're in these codependent relationships and we're running on absolutely empty. And then, how to get out of that place is a very tricky minefield to get back to a center and, take care of our own needs because we just like evacuate our own needs for everybody else.
Exactly. And it's really interesting because that doesn't happen to everybody.
Right.
It happens to many, many, many people, but not everybody. And so the way that I see the risk factors are when you grow up in a household where your feelings and your emotions are under responded to or ignored, you as a child realize that your emotions the message you receive is my emotions are not valuable, they're not welcome, and I need to push them away. This isn't a conscious decision, of course, but the child ends up pushing away his or her feelings and basically walling them off from herself or himself. And then the child grows into adulthood without proper access to her emotions. And that is where the empty space comes from. If you're disconnected or not connected enough to your own emotions, you're disconnected from a vital source of energy and connection and motivation and direction. And it leaves you, over responding to other people, under responding to your own needs. It sets up a dynamic that plays out in every area of your life as an adult, even your relationships.
It does. And when you came up with the title Running on Empty, since what I said was a piece of it, what did you mean by that title?
I meant the empty space inside of you when your feelings are pushed away. One of the things I noticed about people who grew up with their emotions underattended to, and it's a really subtle thing to see, which is why I think it's been so overlooked in the mental health field. When I started to see that was happening for so many of my patients, I realized that many of them complained about having empty feelings at times, or feeling numb, or feeling incomplete somehow, or different from other people. And it turned out that the reason they feel this way is because of that empty space that's left because they are not accessing and using and feeling their feelings in the way they're meant to be.
Mm-hmm. How about situations where one or more parents, they are so emotional. There's no room for your feelings or what's happened to you as a child to exist. And anytime that you let's say have a crisis of some kind as a child, the parent is always going to trump that with whatever's going on with them. Because I have many friends who their parents are screaming, crying, hiding in the bathroom, and the child is having to deal with this parent that's completely emotionally unstable, and the whole house is filled up with this person's emotions. There's no room for the child to have any whatsoever. They're certainly not going to be tended to. So is that something that you see as well?
Absolutely. I think there are a variety of different ways that this happens to children. And in my first book, I identified 12 different parent types that can lead to childhood emotional neglect and exactly how it plays out with each parent type. And the one category of parents is the self-involved, the ones who are narcissistic or authoritarian or addicted or even sociopathic. The parent who, takes up too much room and the child learns how to take up very little room. That is the definition of childhood emotional neglect, when the child's emotions are either ignored or unnoticed or actively discouraged or, overshadowed. It all has the same effect in the end.
What symptoms would you see for a child growing up in that environment having, let's say, in the narcissistic, sociopathic home, or, what we were just talking about? What kind of symptoms would you see in the child as they grow into adulthood?
Basically, when I've gotten to a point where I can really see childhood emotional neglect in people pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I hope that doesn't make any listeners feel uncomfortable if they ever meet me. But it's really just this tendency to want to take up little space, that it feels like that's the right thing to do. Like, don't shine, don't be yourself. Don't let your needs be known. Don't let what you feel be known. So it's kind of just a feeling of being squelched but it's the way you grew up, so you don't even realize that you're squelching yourself now. But adults who grew up this way really, really do, because they're squelching such an important part of themselves, like the most deeply personal biological part of who we all are is our emotions. And if you're squelching that, you're squelching yourself and your true light. And so people who grow up this way just tend to feel like they're missing something and they're different from other people. But they don't even realize it. They just assume everyone feels this way.
Yeah, I've noticed too that some, that go to therapy and they do the work and they start to express themselves and individuate and become, use their voice, find their voice and then use it, and then even maybe delight in themselves, my God, for the first time in their lives. And that parent that, is still doing whatever it is they do, they haven't gone through this process, done the work, whatever it may be, absolutely will support that for a while, I've seen. But if it gets too high self-esteem or too something, man, they want to reel that back in. And usually what I've seen when talking about this with friends is that it's their anger or resentment or envy that they can't find that voice of their own. So they want to squelch it from their child. It can be that this person is really narcissistic. And so that's, of course, what they do just because of the nature of their disorder. But it's also, a lot of it can be really envy on the part of the parent that their child gets to experience this and will say no and have boundaries and continue to not allow their parent to behave this way as an adult towards them. And the parent really has a problem with that.
Yes. I always say there's a way that the self-involved or narcissistic parent has of holding back their best and the best and brightest in the family.
Yes. Because
they don't want to be overshadowed. And that is the antithesis of what a parent is supposed to do. And it has a huge effect. I mean, when we're talking about narcissistic parents, that has, yes, there's childhood emotional neglect there, but there's also like a sort of active damage that happens. Whereas true childhood emotional neglect in its purest form can happen from a parent who is actually loving and well-meaning and wants to do right by the child, but he or she himself grew up without adequate attention or response to her own emotions. So the parent doesn't understand emotions, doesn't pay attention to emotion, has that blind spot, and basically treats her child like her child has no emotions either. And so it's just this blind spot that ends up squelching a vital source in the child and transfers invisibly from one generation to another.
Right. How do you get in and start working with someone to break those patterns?
Well, I've been developing this theory over the last 5 years, and I've developed a series of steps that allows the person who grew up with CEN to begin to break through the wall that they have set up and start accessing their emotions. And it's really amazing what that does. It's an incredible difference when you just decide, okay, I want my feelings now. I want them back. And you start trying to reach them, you can actually do that. Mm-hmm. I've had people say, I don't have feelings. I just don't have them. But as soon as I start working with them on retrieving them, they do start to have feelings.
That can be,
and that's just
really
step one.
Scary. Yeah, that could be really scary because if that's a step I've found even in myself, like I feel really uncomfortable, but to be consciously aware of not running to things to stuff those down like I did as a kid. So don't go to the refrigerator, don't go to alcohol, don't go to a toxic relationship. Just sit here and feel your feelings, uncomfortable or not. And sometimes really happy feelings are hard to deal with too, because I'm just so, not it just feels like too much. So that's an interesting exercise, because for many years I just acted out of my subconscious and looked for anything I could to squash those feelings, because whether it was a good feeling or a bad, it was all a foreign.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you have a lot of painful feelings that are on the other side of the wall. They don't go away.
Right.
They sit there, and then they get activated by things that happen in your daily life. But because you're not in touch with those feelings and you're not aware of them and you don't even know they're there, they are in the driver's seat. So they get touched off like a volcano. They spew their lava up, and you're sitting there, with a bunch of lava, not knowing what to do with it. So, and if your feelings have been ignored your whole life, it means you didn't learn the emotion skills, which are just the key to health. And the emotion skills are just what you were just talking about, being able to sit with an emotion, put words to it, tolerate it, accept it for what it is, which is a big one, and try to understand it and process it and decide, is it trying to tell me to do something that I should do, or is this a feeling that I need to just let myself feel it and manage it? It's amazing how that makes emotions far less powerful when you do that.
Yeah, otherwise you're running around. I know many of us have talked about we're running around from diagnosis to diagnosis. Well, you have bipolar disorder. Well, you're borderline. Well, you've got PTSD. And while some of those things may be true, what I love about what I read about what you've written is, as you learn that you can have your emotions and where they sit in your body and that it's okay to feel them and so on, it's like lifting a lid off of a boiling pot and letting some steam out. All of a sudden, you're not reactive to every single thing that goes on in your life. So you're much calmer. Your resting state is calmer. And those diagnoses tend to go away because what you're really dealing with is what you're talking about. And you're just putting what you just said to use. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. I couldn't agree more. I mean, a lot of people will come to me and say, I have depression. My PCP referred me to you. And if you start helping them access their feelings and listening to them and using them, they're not depressed anymore. Now, that's not to say that medicine along with that isn't often needed just to get the brain chemicals back in line.
Right.
But changing how you deal with your emotions is huge. It can help with anxiety. It can help people with personality disorders. It can help depression and, relationship issues, people having problems with their marriage. If you teach them how to deal with their emotions differently, it makes a tremendous difference.
Well, let's keep going down the list because I stopped you at 1.
This could be a long interview.
That's okay. We can always have you come back on. The first one was emotions, number 1. You had a list from one of your books.
Of healing?
Yeah.
The steps of healing, yes. Yeah. So reaching your emotions. And then the second is learning the emotion skills. So actually we've talked about 2.
Okay.
Yeah, so once you start accessing your emotions, it's really important to have the skills to deal with them. And that's the second thing to begin to work on. And then one thing that is very common with people who grow up this way is a feeling of not being quite as valid as everybody else. Mm-hmm. And it's just this sort of one down position, like what you want is more important than what I want. What you need is more important. What other people think is more important. And I need to hold myself back or I'll alienate people or I'll lose people in my life. That kind of back burner stance is a huge problem. But once you start accessing your emotions and working on using your emotion skills, then you can start to apply them to yourself. You start feeling more empowered, like you've accessed this source within yourself that gives you so much more power. And, I can see it when people reach this point that they start to express themselves differently and act differently, paying more attention to what they want for themselves, what they need, what they feel. And so the third step is using all of that to start to feel more valid and more on equal footing with everyone else. And then part of that is learning assertiveness skills, because that's another skill set that you can learn. Anyone can learn how to be assertive if you work at it hard enough.
Boy, is it uncomfortable, but you can learn it.
Yes, exactly. Yep. It does. You have to be willing to take some risks, because it can feel so wrong when you were programmed as a child to never, to not speak up for yourself.
Right.
And then the reason I wrote my second book, which is called Running on Empty No More, Transform Your Relationships with Your Partner, Your Parents, and Your Children. The reason I wrote it is because of the fourth step of recovery, which is begin to use everything that you now have, which is your emotion skills, your increased feeling of validity and empowerment, and starting to put that into your relationships. It's sort of ripple effects throughout your entire life. And it really makes a huge difference in every relationship in your life once you start taking up the amount of space that you're supposed to take up.
Have you seen, we'll go to 5 next, but have you seen people that, it's like a pendulum swinging? They evacuated as much space as possible as a child, and then they start working on your steps as an example, and then they maybe overcompensate for a bit, maybe annoy some people with their new sense of empowerment, and then sort of come back to center?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because people say to me all the time, CEN people, childhood emotional neglect people, that's their greatest fear in their recovery, is that they will become self-centered.
Yes. And
I have yet to see that ever happen with anyone who grew up with childhood emotional neglect. What they may think they're being that way, but actually they're just behaving in a, normal, take up the right amount of space way. I think it's so hard once you're programmed that way to fight against it, that I really don't see people going to the extreme, except in one way, which is coming back to the assertiveness skills. The assertiveness skills are so important, because once you start knowing what you feel and trying to express it, being able to do it in a way that doesn't offend or hurt other people, that's where those skills come in.
Right.
So I have heard that. I've heard people say I'm standing up for myself now more, and people at work are getting mad at me. And then we just go back and work on assertiveness skills. That's all it is.
Okay. See, you can tell I'm a CEN person, because I have this new sense of empowerment, and surrounded by so many friends that are like, you're not behaving badly, but the parent that isn't happy with the behavior is, you're self-centered, you're this, you're whatever it is. And it's hard not to go back and try to fight that. Just like people that have been in a relationship with someone who does have narcissistic personality disorder, what we see all the time is the victims in the relationship, the spouse, for example, or the children, get to a place where they question, well, am I the narcissist? And we always say, okay, the fact that you even ask that question means that you're not. So it kind of sounds to me like what you're saying there. Someone who suffers from childhood emotional neglect would think, oh, yes, I've gone way off the deep end. Now I'm completely self-centered. And it's probably just that it's really uncomfortable to finally, put yourself first in some instances.
Yes, exactly. I mean, of all of the hundreds of people that I've worked with, and, I have an online recovery program, and I talk to people in the program on the phone every 2 weeks. And I have never once, of all the people that I've walked through this recovery process, had one single one who bounced too far in the other direction. Mm-hmm. I just don't think it's a thing.
Yeah, we think it is because we get uncomfortable, but it isn't. Yeah, but I think, exactly. If you have a very controlling parent and they're not taking care of their own CEN issues, then they'll definitely want to squelch your doing that for yourself as an adult.
Yes, one thing I wanted to say about that is that as a therapist, and I'm sure a lot of therapists have this in common with me, as soon as I hear a parent describe one of their kids as selfish, my alarm bells go up because often the selfish one in the family is the healthiest one. It's the one who got out and broke away and started growing and had to keep boundaries. And that makes you be called the selfish one because from the perspective of the parents, maybe some siblings too, it can make that person look selfish.
Yeah, it can. And I think some of it is some envy. Maybe that's not the right word, at their own not doing this for themselves. And, you know, or I don't know if that's the right word at all, but just that's something that I've felt sometimes, like, I know you're not happy with your life and you have the ability to change your life. I can't do it for you. I can't fix this for you, but I'm not going to stop my path of feeling good and happy and having healthy relationships just because you're upset that you're not, you know, your upsetness at me has nothing to do with me. It has to do with you and you holding yourself back from your healing.
Yeah. And don't you think it has to do with having to share the limelight or not being the person in the limelight? So I think that's probably what you're calling envy, which is, I think, a fine word for it. You know, the narcissist feels like, I have to be the one. I'm the one. What are you doing? You're shining. You're distracting from me. Get back here.
Oh yeah. I've had moments where I'm breaking out of my career. I'm doing better than I ever have, but it's still a journey for everyone. And 5 minutes before I get up to do a speech, I'm getting phone calls, ranting and raving phone calls from a parent about things that they know I'm about ready to get up and do the biggest speech of my life. And the phone call comes 5 minutes beforehand. And my saying, normally I would just try to placate and and I finally got to a place where I said, you know what? This is not acceptable. Do not call me about this. You know, I'm getting up to do a speech. This is not okay. Don't ever do this again. And then hang up. Boy, was there punishment later for that. But I never got called again. It popped up in other areas, but we're dealing with some pretty severe narcissism, and that's why that happens. But yeah, taking those steps as an adult, you couldn't really do that as a kid. Like, you're running all over my boundaries. Well, you're 8. Get over it. You know what I mean? So
yes. And plus, 8-year-olds don't have that language either. Exactly. They don't even know that this isn't how it's supposed to be. So yeah, as a kid, you're just helpless.
Yep. Yeah. I remember sitting and being offered up to do things for other people to, I don't know, make the parent feel good or special. And I'm like, where? And even at that young age going, I am not a monkey on a stick for you to dance around like a chess piece. I'm me. And if I don't want to do something for someone, I want to say that I don't want to do that. And sometimes it was for someone who was abusive that, the parent is completely ignored. And so I was glad I had these awarenesses very young that I don't want to do that, but I still couldn't say no. I just stuffed it, and, food and whatever else would help me stuff it and get through it. But I was really angry and resentful a lot of the time because I would have to. And then I was told, well, you're such an angry kid. You're so this or that. And I thought, okay, so now this is getting turned into, again, I'm the one with the problem. No, the originator of the problem is you. But you don't figure those things out until lots of therapy, and as you do what you're talking about, the assertiveness and having a voice and so on.
Yeah. I find that so many people with CEN have narcissistic parents.
Yes.
It just goes with the package. It's almost impossible to escape it when you're a child growing up in that situation. And in my newest book that just came out, The Running on Empty No More, one of the characters in the book has a narcissistic mother. And the question is, should she try to talk with her mother about childhood emotional neglect? And of course, that is just a minefield that for most people in a situation like that, there's no way it's going to go well.
Nope.
But sometimes it helps to just have a conversation that says exactly what you feel and what you think to a parent like that, because it sets up a boundary. And at least when you don't return the call or you don't answer or you distance, you have told your parent exactly why you're doing that, and it eases some of the guilt. So
It does. No, you're absolutely right. That's fascinating to me. One of the things I made sure I did with my son, who I was no perfect parent, believe me, but trying to get out of what is generations of abuse in our family, high narcissism, rampant. And, one of the things I said to him was, listen, go to therapy because God, you need it. Your dad and I were your parents and we didn't know what we were doing. We both came from childhood emotional neglect. So we both were lacking in many ways and we just ran towards each other as each other's saviors. And thank God we still love each other 30 years later. But
wonderful.
I said to him, go to therapy, tell everything you need to tell about me. I don't care if I'm Mental Health News Radio and your therapist has heard the show, or I don't care. Tell everything you need to tell. And if you need me to come in there and sit and own everything that you experienced, I totally will.
Oh my gosh.
And
that is so, I wish every parent in the world would do that. It would just be a massive healing.
Yes, it would. I know
the problem is parents
too.
who won't own their mistakes. Yeah.
No,
I'm the
don't.
same way. I've made so many mistakes with my kids and I just completely just own them. It's impossible to do anything else.
You can't. That was another conversation with my son. I said, I don't care. I carry guilt for what you had to deal with, but I can't carry the shame anymore. And I had the conversation with him. I said, I know you don't know what to do with that, but I'm just telling you, I can't keep carrying the shame around it anymore because it's actually crippling me from getting better. And I know that's what you want. I know that's what I want. So just know I do feel guilty sometimes about things that you experience, but I don't feel ashamed of it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I just took it off, took myself off the rack for it and used the guilt to examine, look at, heal, move on to the next stage for me, which is ultimately what's best for your child anyway. I mean, the best thing that they could see you do as a parent, even as adults, is continue to become a more evolved, more connected, more healed person.
Absolutely. That is for sure.
Well, this is fascinating to me. So when you're talking to people and they're coming to you and they're listening to you speak, how many light bulbs or how long does it usually take? I know it depends on the person, but when they start hearing you talking and the repetition of what they're doing and what they experienced and the validation, I would think that's so huge. What is it like for you? I guess not how long. What is it like for you to see that the light bulb has been turned on and they get it? At least they're starting to get it.
It's tremendous. It really is. And I kind of miss that experience a little bit. At this point, most people I come in contact with, either in my office or in my online program or anywhere else, have already read something that I wrote and they've already had that light bulb moment. Mm-hmm. And that's why they're contacting me, right? So that's great because then we can just jump right in. I did, before this was all put out there so much, I did have that experience more of leading people to it. And it can be hard to help someone see it in themselves. I think most people get it easily if they read Running on Empty, the first book, or any of my blogs, like the blogs, a lot of people, the light bulb goes off. It's very rewarding though. I guess that would be my answer to your actual question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I find fascinating. Once you find this and you have a name for it and you can work from root pain, root trauma, you're literally going to the root of things for yourself. It's painful, but the other side of that is really the best life you can live.
Yes, and I want to emphasize for a lot of people, it's not necessarily trauma and it's not necessarily a lot of root pain. Mm-hmm. It's more just a process of just living your, kind of walking through the motions in your life because you're disconnected. And these are the people who grew up with what I call well-meaning but neglected themselves parents. And I think that affects, untold numbers of people who grew up that way and, feel like they had a good childhood, but it was just missing this one tremendously vital ingredient, which was emotional responsiveness from their parents. And they have no idea what's wrong. But so the process of getting in touch with their emotions is still scary, but it doesn't necessarily have to always involve a lot of trauma or pain.
Okay, good point. In terms of narcissism, that's such a hot trending topic, and I can tell you every show we do on that particular subject goes through the roof in terms of downloads. So
Yeah.
I've said on shows I'm kind of sick of talking about it. I did experience it in many different ways, but I do get tired of talking about it, and yet that is what people crave to hear. So I just get over it and talk about it anyway, because God, do I know it inside and out. Nothing like lived experience, but what do you say about that? Our culture and what's happening and why that would be such a hot topic now. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's because once people started talking about it, personality disorders in general they're hard to understand. They're hard for lay people to understand, which makes a lot of sense because it's just, a character disorder. It's not like depression. It's, things that are like really clear symptoms. And so I think personality disorders have really not been talked about hardly at all until the last very recent, like maybe 2 years or so, maybe 3 years, where narcissism started to be addressed. And once that door was opened and people started understanding what narcissism is, it really, the floodgates opened, because almost everybody has someone in their life who has these traits or the full-blown personality disorder. And many, many people have struggled with in a relationship with someone, whether it's their parent, a sibling, a romantic relationship. And it's just so painful and hard and difficult to navigate that I think there's just, it's sort of like the door opened a crack and people are running through it because they're so hungry for this information.
That's why I think what you're talking about and then talking about narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder are just so critical, because of the damage that you have to unravel over the course of a lifetime. It is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a big piece, but it also, to become narcissistic, a person also has to have other forces present in childhood.
Right. And that's a whole other show that we could do just on that.
Yes, it is.
Well, tell our listeners, this has been fantastic. Tell our listeners where they can find your incredible articles. And believe me, listeners, when I tell you, these articles are so, so good. So please let them know where they can find them. On
my website, it's emotionalneglect.com, which is easy to remember. And also I have a weekly blog on psychcentral.com. It's the emotional neglect page on Psych Central.
Fantastic.
And also I developed a questionnaire, I should mention, which if you're listening and you're not sure if childhood emotional neglect applies to you, you can go to my website, emotionalneglect.com, and take the questionnaire. It's free, and it will help you know whether you grew up with this or not.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I truly appreciate it. I hope you'll come back on again.
Thank you. I'd love to.
All right. And thank you to our listeners for another edition of Mental Health News Radio. Get ready for it, because here it comes. But first, thank you again to our sponsors like EverythingEHR.com, devoted to helping organizations finding the best electronic health record in behavioral health, and Service Dogs by Warren Retrievers, SDWR.org, a nonprofit organization that provides service dogs to those with unique abilities and invisible diseases, to include autism, diabetes, epilepsy, and PTSD. Until there's a cure, there's a dog. And hey, an SDWR service dog is at work every day with one of our own team members. If you have a question, visit us at mentalhealthnewsradio.com or our network of podcasters at mhnrnetwork.com. Disruptors, healers, technologists, advocates, and most importantly, voices to be heard from all corners of the globe. Thank you so much for joining us.
And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.